as always. And Samantha, what really is firm resettlement and how can this impact an asylum case?
Yeah, it's a really good question and one that we see often. So firm resettlement, basically if someone's applying for asylum, if the government deems that they've, quote, firmly resettled in another country before they got here, they may not be eligible to apply for asylum. So what does that even mean? Well, firm resettlement is when an individual, before they get to the U.S., either entered another country or while they were there, received some sort of offer of permanent residence, citizenship, something along those lines. And it's important to know that they don't need to accept that offer of residence, just the mere fact that it was offered to them. The government can try and allege that there was firm resettlement in a case. Also, if there was some sort of mechanism, maybe, for example, you're in the country for 5 years and then you'd be eligible to apply for something down the road, that could also lead to a firm resettlement finding. I mentioned entering another country could be a problem. Well, it's important to know that it doesn't matter how long you've been in another country on your way to the U.S., as long as you entered that other country, it could potentially be an issue. But you can also argue, and one of the exceptions is that you were only entering that country as a way to escape your home country, for example, a layover or on your route to the U.S. So that's okay. Mm-hmm. And something that we have to deal with often are, individuals who maybe were afraid to go to their home country, couldn't get to the U.S., and then went to another country where they lived for a few years. And so the question really becomes, how do we argue around firm resettlement, and what does that really mean? So there's a couple of exceptions. One of them is if the residence conditions that you were offered were, quote, substantially and consciously restricted by authorities. So, for example, you couldn't find employment because of the type of residence you had. You couldn't find housing. Your rights were really limited there. Mm-hmm. Another really common exception that we run into a lot are if you fled to this other country, you obtained residence, but then you were threatened or harmed in that country. It almost becomes like filing for asylum from two separate entities or two separate countries. And that's really the most common one that we see. So, of course, every case is different, and evaluating every case on a case-by-case basis is extremely important. So it's important to keep firm resettlement in mind because even if you may have obtained residence or may have been offered residence in another country, there can be some ways around that and some ways to make that argument to the government.
Yes, and thank you for clarifying that. And how would the U.S. really know that someone was offered, citizenship or anything otherwise in another country?
So it's actually a question on the application. Okay. So you would be disclosing that information to them. Of course, I would never advise someone to withhold any information from the government. Mm-hmm. It's not a matter of, I guess, concealing it. It's more a matter of explaining the circumstances.
Uh-huh. Wow. Okay. So a lot of options there. And thank you so much, Samantha, for clarifying that for us. And of course, the NPZ Law Group is your one-stop shop for all U.S. and Canadian immigration matters. Call them today at 2